The sun went dark just minutes ago. Everyone watched as it happened. In the darkness that followed, some people cheered while others cried, but most just stood in silence, watching. 20 years ago, a scientist predicted this disaster. No one believed him at first, but more and more evidence proved he was right. The sun would die in 20 years. When this news spread, the whole world fell into a deep depression. Strange, extreme ideas began spreading, making everyone anxious. Some people went crazy, some wanted to die, and others turned violent. Soon after, scientists created sleeping pods. They had a bold idea. Humans could sleep through this dark time until the sun came back to life. These pods became everyone's last hope. A month before the sun died, they finished building the last sleep center. Sleep centers were built all over the world, with enough pods for everyone on Earth. When the moment finally came, you stood in the crowd, looking up at the sky. The sun moved overhead as usual, then suddenly went dark without warning. The world fell into darkness, and city lights turned on, making it feel like an early night, just without the moon. Then the radio announcement began. Please go to your nearest sleep center, following the same steps as in our practice drills. The crowd started moving in one direction. As you walked with them, you saw fallen buildings and messy streets, thinking how people had already destroyed so much before the real disaster even began. Someone grabbed your arm. It was your friend. They asked if you would reconsider going into hibernation. You thought about it but decided to go into hibernation. Your friend didn't try to stop you anymore. After the sleep pod plan started, many people refused to sleep. Your friend was one of them. They had tried many times to convince you to stay awake, but you chose to sleep. Hours after the sun went dark, the city was empty. Most people had gathered at the sleep centers. You could only see a few people who chose to stay awake, still living their lives. They would face this world without sunlight, their future a deep darkness full of unknown things. The heavy metal doors of the sleep center slowly closed. Outside, a few people who chose to stay awake were waving goodbye to their loved ones. Your friend was among them. You watched them, knowing you'd never meet again. You wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. When the doors closed, everyone inside no longer belonged to this era. Lying in your sleep pod, you took one last precious look at this world. Soon, light blue liquid filled the pod, covering your whole body, and quickly froze. At the same time, thousands of sleep centers around Earth played the same message in different languages, starting hibernation. A series of mechanical sounds woke you in the darkness. Your stomach started moving slowly, and your heart began to beat. The liquid in your pod slowly drained away. After some time, you opened your eyes. Your mind slowly cleared as the wake-up sounds continued. You lifted your arm, surprised that your body felt the same. Your memories from before sleeping were still clear. Stepping out of your pod, you found the center dark. You found a flashlight and looked around, seeing that some pods were open and empty. A small screen on your pod showed a number, 12,024. 10,000 years had passed. Looking at this number felt unreal. Then you noticed the center's main door had a gap wide enough for one person. Sand had piled up through the opening. You climbed up the sand slope and saw only darkness outside. Your flashlight's beam disappeared into the black, showing only sandy ground and dried plant roots where it reached. The disaster wasn't over. You walked outside, The world beyond was pure darkness, with stars that gave no real light. You walked forward, hoping to find signs of civilization, but after walking for a while, you saw only the same sand and roots. Then your flashlight began to dim. No matter how you switched it, it wouldn't turn back on. Your fear grew stronger. Without light, you got down and crawled forward, feeling your way. After struggling back for several minutes, you couldn't find the sleep center. The ground became softer, and when you felt it, you found it was very wet. You followed the wet ground, thinking it might lead to water. After walking for a while, the ground got softer, and the air smelled like rot. When you took your next step, you heard a strange bubbling sound, and then you started sinking. You realized you had stepped into a swamp. You tried to back up and pull your feet out, but it was too late. While you were thinking, half your body had sunk into the mud. You were sinking every second, and the mud was almost at your chest. In panic, you grabbed a tree branch. In this crisis, you stuck the branch under your body in the mud, creating a support point. With all your strength, you managed to pull part of your body out. Then you lay back, moving your arms and legs like you were floating on your back, slowly moving towards solid ground. Finally, you escaped the swamp. After this close call, you became much more careful. After walking a long distance, the muddy ground became sandy again. You knew you had left the swamp area and felt relieved. The sandy ground had only plant roots and no other dangers so far. You found a dry branch to test the ground ahead, which helped you walk faster. Without sight, you focused on listening. After walking for several hours, you still hadn't found the sleep center. You knew you probably wouldn't find your way back. Then you heard voices talking in the distance. Your breathing quickened. As you listened carefully, you realized they were speaking your language. You felt so excited you couldn't describe it. Hearing your own language after 10,000 years made you feel at home. As you got closer, they noticed you and asked cautiously who you were. You said you were a traveler from far away, tired and looking for rest. They were suspicious at first, but after you made up some stories about your journey, they relaxed. They were interested in your strange tales and invited you to their village. Of course you accepted. In the village, you found they had completely adapted to life in darkness, surviving by hearing and smell. They gave you a house to stay in, and soon someone brought food. From the voice, it was a young girl. You called to the girl and asked where you could learn about their culture. She thought for a moment and said,
"Follow me."
In the darkness, you couldn't keep up with her pace. Thinking you had trouble walking, she came back and took your hand. Her hand was warm, and you didn't want to let go. The girl took you to a building she called the library. You wondered how to read, but found the books were in Braille. You knew some Braille, and after reading several books, discovered they were all from 10,000 years ago. Later, you searched the whole small library and found all the books were from that time. The girl respected these books deeply, saying they were treasures from their ancestors. These books helped them keep their language and understanding of the world alive. Several hours passed without notice. Then a horn sounded outside. As you wondered what it meant, the girl ran into the library and pulled you into a cellar-like place. You could feel her hand shaking. You asked what was happening. She said, "Other tribes are attacking us." Soon you heard fighting outside. The girl said, "Be quiet. Enemies are coming to the cellar." You heard footsteps getting closer. Still holding the girl's hand, you decided to play hero and ran out of the cellar, shouting. You regretted it immediately. Everything went quiet for a few seconds, Then many footsteps ran toward you. You turned and ran. As you fled, you fell many times in the darkness, but the enemies kept chasing. Then you felt the ground change from sand to mud. The familiar feeling told you you'd reached the swamp area. You saw this as a chance and ran deeper into the swamp. Soon, you heard cries of horror as the enemies fell into the swamp too. You knew how to escape and quickly got out of the swamp area while the enemies remained trapped, their cries echoing in the darkness. Soon, warriors from the village caught up. Learning you had defeated the enemies, they led you back to the village. You became a hero, and they brought you a plate of food. Then you heard children gathering around. You could hear them swallowing hungrily. You offered the plate, saying, "Let's share." Within seconds, the children had taken all the food. The girl from before shooed the children away, apologizing and explaining that they were very hungry. Though they had stopped the attack, their food storage had been emptied. What you shared was the village's last food. You quickly asked, "What will we do?" The girl seemed sad, saying the village had formed a team to search for food. Without hesitation, you said, "I want to join." The girl's voice trembled. "You're just a traveler passing by, yet you keep helping us. I don't know how to thank you." After hesitating, she took your hand and whispered, so only you could hear, If you don't mind, I would follow you for life." You held her hand tighter, accepting. You joined the team, leaving the village, feeling excited. You thought this era wasn't so bad. At least love between people was pure. You could still feel the warmth of the girl's hand lingering in your palm, making your mind wander. Everyone traveled for dozens of hours but found no food. As you headed back to the village feeling down, one team member discovered something. He said he smelled food in the air and ran in one direction. Another member excitedly said this person had the best nose. If he smelled food, it must be true. Everyone followed. After running several hundred meters, they stopped, excitedly shouting they'd found it. Before you could react, you heard the sound of metal being torn apart. A spark flashed in front of you. Then everything lit up. They shouted together, thanking heaven for the food. At the same time, rain began falling, washing away the smelly mud from your body. Only then could you see clearly. The beings around you weren't human at all, but giant, hairless, standing rats.